Hello, 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 everybody, and welcome to another adventure in history. And I need to change the streaming information because I didn't do that last time. I hope everybody is doing all right. Hope that everybody is having a happy day. I love all okay, so those are Hunk's arms around the adventure hat. Okay, I guess I'll take that. Mine do not look nearly that powerful. Hey, everybody. Welcome. Hey, Yafid. Hey, Vern. It's been a weird day. It's been a very long day. I'm kind of loopy. Hey, big crowds, what's up? Welcome. I just went up to, I guess, kind of like say goodbye to Brittany because I'm coming back here to stream for a couple hours, and gave her a kiss, and I almost said, "Night, baby," like we were going to go to bed, because that's kind of it's kind of how out of it I am right now. That she's like, I would have probably said see you in the morning, so Shaniacs. Oh man. Back when I was teaching high school, I did have a group of students that I called my guided missiles, and I was going to train them to think for themselves and then turn them loose to blow up stupid wherever they found it for the rest of their lives. And that was pretty great. At one point during homecoming week, we had dress up days, and one of them was just like dress up like a nerd day. And several of the students that were sort of in this kind of group showed up dressed as me. They had like What's up, man? Hey, Ethan.
Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him.
Hey, Ethan. So they showed up wearing t-shirts and blue jeans and flip-flops, which is like my default. If you see me in public, I will almost certainly be wearing blue jeans, t-shirt, and flip-flops. And I commented that they needed goatees for it to be accurate. So one of the kids was like, get a expo marker and draw a goatee on me. So that I ended up like drawing goatees on all these kids. It was the closest I'd ever come to inducting someone into a cult. Hey, Graythar, what's up, man? So that's as close to I've ever come as actually having Shaniacs. I taught some really great kids back when I was teaching high school. I'm still in contact with some of them. There's some of them that will occasionally pop in on the show here, just to hang out. So, today's weird. I was explaining, I think maybe just before you popped in, that today's just been really, really weird, and I don't think my head's screwed on the right way. I've been very out of it. I didn't sleep very well last night. I kept waking up a whole lot. I don't know. It's just been a weird day. I don't feel like I ever really got my footing. But that's okay, because now we get to talk here on stream, and we'll have a good time and laugh, and maybe my goofiness will make me say something stupid that you all can clip and preserve for internet future. But the show is Adventures in History, and I'm Shane McKenna. I teach history for a living at a college here in Mississippi where I live. I love history, and the show is designed at breaking down the idea that history has to be boring, because it does not have to be boring. We can have fun, we can make goofy pop cultural references and bad puns all day long, and we can talk about things in a way that is very laid back and easy to approach, because history doesn't have to be boring. Glad you could catch this live. Yeah, I saw that you mentioned that you had some shift changes. So I'm glad to have you. It's always good to see you live. All right. So on Tuesdays, when we have Tuesday streams here, we do viewer requests. And in this particular instance, we are doing a viewer request that our group voted on. The history of archaeology. Hey, Jacob Rennie. Or Jacob Rennie. It could be Jocko Brenny or Cobrini. Hey, Jacob. Excited? Yeah, I'm pretty excited myself. When this one popped up as viewer request choice, I got real excited because I immediately was like, I'm going to talk about this person, I'm going to talk about that person, and I'm going to say all this stuff, and I'm going to talk about that stuff. And then I realized I don't want to be here for 3.5 hours covering all of this stuff. So I need to be a little bit more selective maybe, and don't talk about every single potential person that I might. But the request was specifically for the development of the field and the techniques in it. So I have tried to construct a narrative out of all of these different groups of people, and I have tried to focus on the ones that have added specific either techniques or validity or popularity to the field of archaeology. So archaeology, just very basically, is the study of old stuff. Relics left behind by humans. And we do need to do a little bit of terminology discussion off the bat here. Archaeology is related to many other fields, including geology, anthropology, history, paleontology, all sorts of stuff like that. But it is a field to itself. It is specifically looking at human remains and cultural items that humans have made throughout human history. And this does extend way back into prehistory. Again, like 99% of human history so far has been prehistory, and most of what we know from prehistory has come from the work of people like archaeologists. So that's where there's a lot of blanks to be filled in. But, of course, the field itself has not always been around. It's actually rather new. The sort of standardization of archaeology as a discipline didn't really happen until the early 1900s, but I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. So, where are we going to start? And this was a really hard question for me, because if I started earlier or closer to us now in time, I could talk about more of the individual people that I think are really cool and some of the stuff that they've discovered. But I decided to do the whole scope. So we're going to start all the way back in antiquity with some people that did some stuff that we would call today archaeology. They did not at that time call archaeology. But we're going to start all the way back with people like this guy. This is Herodotus. Herodotus is mostly known for writing a whole bunch of really cool stuff that we've read, including stories of his travels around the ancient world and what he saw. But what a lot of people sort of either look over or neglect to point out about Herodotus is that one of the reasons he was doing a lot of this traveling is because he took it upon himself to sort of ferret out the origins of things. There were, in the ancient world, a whole lot of just, these myths or these common sayings. And Herodotus was a sort of ancient myth buster kind of guy. He had the funds and the opportunity to travel, so he would go to places and see if he could prove the veracity of some of these stories. And sometimes he was able to point to specific artifacts, like, oh yes, there is actually a person that did this. I saw the tomb of so-and-so. Or he could say, well, this is clearly conjecture because there's no proof of this stuff. So he cataloged artifacts. He traveled all around the ancient Mediterranean world, down into Africa, through Egypt, and did a whole bunch of cool stuff. And while he's considered one of the founders of the modern study of history, he's also pretty important to archaeology because he proved, even back in the ancient world, that there are people that are interested in this stuff. And we see people like Herodotus kind of throughout the ancient world, and they do things that we would qualify as, kind of as archaeology, but they're not really doing it for the right reasons. What do you think about when those statues were smashed in Hatra? I'm pretty sad about that stuff. I mean, we can go ahead and talk about this whole thing, but the study of archaeology today is running into a lot of roadblocks with a lot of, we can only really say it the way that it is, a lot of particular worldviews. Archaeology is a field that, if done correctly, does not particularly hold a religious belief or does not particularly hold a political alliance, but religion and politics both play into archaeology. And in areas where there are particular beliefs that are very strong, history is destroyed. No. Don't feel sorry. I mean, it's important to talk about this stuff. So, what's being referenced here is part of a larger sort of feel that happened back when ISIS was in charge in Iraq and Syria. And it's a pretty ancient city. There were a lot of things there, and effectively, because the people that were in charge of ISIS were very, very strict, ultra-conservative Muslims, they believed that a lot of the remains of some of these ancient places were effectively sacrilegious, especially images, places that had statues of either humans or, older gods. Those were targeted for destruction. But this wasn't just in Hatra. There are other places like Palmyra, one of the ancient cities that was for a little while an independent country in the modern day. It would have been in the modern day countries of like Iraq and Syria. That city was under a lot of damage. Dara Europos is another city that had a lot of artwork and old stuff, ancient stuff. We're talking 2,000-year-old stuff that was targeted and destroyed. So archaeology is designed to preserve and understand our past, but that does run into roadblocks. And it's not always roadblocks from modern day sides of things. It's sometimes roadblocks from, even within the field itself. And we'll talk about some of the problems, because archaeology has not always been what I would consider an above the board discipline. So, but no, don't apologize for that. It's always important to talk about the stuff that happens. It's always important for us to know things that happen, and to talk about stuff, even if it is not important, even if it is uncomfortable. Sometimes the uncomfortable stuff is what we need to talk about more. So don't apologize for that at all. So what I was talking about, historically speaking, you do see some people in the ancient world doing stuff that we would consider archaeological in nature, like restoring old tombs of things, or rebuilding temples, or setting back up monuments. For example, Alexander the Great at the tomb of Cyrus, who he saw Alexander sort of wanted to protect the tomb of Cyrus the Great, and saw this as an important symbol that he sort of compared himself to, and ordered soldiers to protect it, and then got really upset when people defiled it, and then did a lot to restore it. But you also see people like Julius Caesar, who used his position within Rome to put back up statues and trophies of people from his family in the past. So you see these people that are using history to usually promote their own power. And they tied themselves to historical power through doing things that we would call today archaeology. And while that has done a lot to preserve things, it's also not really what we would call pure archaeology, because they weren't doing it for the preservation of the artifact for everyone. They were doing it mostly for political or social gains. Shane is also 10,000 years old and is the first archaeologist. If only, Moose. If only. How's it going, man? Welcome. But before we move on, I want to also mention that we're going to talk a lot today about Western culture. But there's also people that do this stuff over in other places. There is a great guy that I really enjoy named Shin Kuo. And this is a modern statue of him. Unfortunately, I was not able to find any antique or old images of him. I always try to find pictures of people from as close to the actual time that they lived as possible. So Shin Kuo, who is this guy? Well, he was alive during the Song dynasty of China. We haven't talked about that in our discussions yet. So this guy's around the 1030s AD, but he's an archaeologist, and he's actually closer to what we would call a modern archaeologist than Herodotus was. This guy excavated ancient cities. He was really interested in finding old artifacts, and he wanted to find these old bronze and iron and sometimes gold artifacts that were created way back, what would have been to him 3,000 years earlier in Chinese history, and make sure that the stuff that they were using during his time was accurate. And he wanted to... by the way, this guy was super involved in everything. He also did geology stuff, astronomy stuff. He's actually most sort of renowned as an astronomer. He was the chief astronomer for one of the emperors, Shin Kuo. Sometimes you see the K with the G. So Shin Guo, but we all know the relationship between the G and the K sound, right? So this guy's a pretty cool dude. It's pretty clear that he dug up stuff that went back all the way as far as the Shang dynasty of China, which is the first provable, concrete, actual dynasty of China that started somewhere around 2200 BC. Cataloged a lot of this stuff, tried to recreate the methods that the ancient people would have used to make these things, was really interested in sort of the foundational knowledge of China. Hey, Cave Geek. Twitch didn't tell you that I was live. Well, that's unfortunate. Mean old Twitch. Bad Twitch. Don't cut me off, Twitch. I'm sorry. But welcome, Cave. We haven't been going very long. I haven't been talking very long either. Well, that's interesting. I wonder if something is up with alerts. I don't know. All right. So let's try to fast forward a little bit, because again, I can't talk about 100% of everything that I would like to talk about. But let's talk about antiquarianism. And this is a fancy word. And this is also a modern word that people use to describe people in the past. This wasn't necessarily a word used in history to define people at that time. But the concept here... Omnidimensional Moose. Yeah, Moose is probably in like 7 different chats, and that's okay. I can appreciate the the need to be in multiple places at once. So there are periods of people, and the antiquarians specifically are in the late medieval period and early Renaissance period. So we're looking at somewhere around the 1000s AD to the 1200s or 1300s AD, around the same time at the beginning when Shen Kuo was doing all of his cool stuff over in China. These people over in Western Europe were realizing how much cool stuff they had lost. The medieval kingdoms had mostly been founded by barbarians who had destroyed Rome back in the 400s, and they had never really been able to keep up the level of culture that the Romans had. So you see these people that are really interested in Greco-Roman leftover stuff because they don't have that skill anymore. They don't have the abilities to do the same things. For example, they couldn't build arches anymore. They couldn't build big domes anymore. They did not have the same level of artistic skill. Hence the paradox and paradox moose. Indeed, there we go. We have discovered the origin of the name. So there are people inside of this world that are interested in sort of restoring the glory of the past, and it's like BattleTech, sort of. No more mechs, just use the old ones, sort of, kind of, sort of. But they do progress past that, and they start building their own art. But when these medieval kingdoms become stable, especially around the 1200s or so, when a lot of the big, violent periods of the medieval world calm down and cooler heads prevail and the borders more or less stabilize, this is between the 1200s and 1300s, you start seeing a lot of people that are really interested in art and really interested in ancient art. And let's just be honest, rich people like pretty things. And rich people have money to pay for pretty things. So you see people that are actually interested in paying for antique artifacts, which is where antiquarianism comes from. And there is a sort of a burgeoning market in the Renaissance world. One of the things that sort of kicks off the Renaissance world is that there weren't a lot of old pieces of art left, and it sort of became cheaper to commission someone to do a piece of art that looked like that stuff than it was to try to go dig up something in some random place in Italy and then drag it all the way up to France. As long as Moose doesn't meet himself in a channel, it's all good. Yeah, don't cross the mooses. Right. So you see some of these antiquarians become sort of interested in figuring out where a lot of this stuff came from. So let's talk about Syriac of Ancona. And I know it's going to say, hey, you're spelling his name wrong, but that's actually his name, Syriac. He looks... Let me get my pictures ready. He looks like this. Boom. Okay, Syriac of Ancona. He's alive from 1391 to 1454. He was in the Catholic Church. And as a member of the Catholic Church, he was able to travel around. And that gave him the opportunity to see a lot of stuff. And a lot of the stuff that he started seeing was this kind of, old stuff. And he decides, I'm going to just start, keeping a record of basically everything that I've seen and everything that I've looked at. And he especially liked looking at inscriptions. And he would go around on all these statues and all these buildings, and he would find commemorations, and he would find plaques and stuff inscribed in stone, and he would catalog all of this stuff. And this became sort of a big fancy to do, and he wrote all this stuff down in this multi-volume work called the Commentaria, which unfortunately has been almost completely lost. He was writing all of this stuff down, of course, on sheaves of parchment and in a fire about, well, it was like 14 or something volumes of this stuff, and we have combined maybe 2 volumes of it. And a lot of the stuff that he's actually referencing having seen is no longer around either, because it's been destroyed in the 700 years since then. So this guy's concept of cataloging and putting a lot of this stuff together is a move towards what we would call today archaeology. A man who puts his Asperger's to good use. Hey, Magnificent, welcome. Oh, I like writing down details. I'll use that for the good of the human race. Okay, so let's talk about another guy named Flavio Biondo. Flavio Biondo. That's a break screen. Flavio Biondo looks like this. Train spotter before there were trains. Pretty much, yes. So this is Flavio Biondo. He was from a little Italian city, and he became just absolutely fascinated. I'm very done with your crap look. That's great. Don't mind me, you drank too much tea. Oh, no, Meg. You're welcome to bring all the goofy you want. Flavio like Fabio's brother. There we go. So he was really interested in how ancient documents compared. Okay, do we have a fake moose now? Who's Paradix Moose? I just noticed that we've... Moose, did you go make another account so that you could be in multiple places and talk to each other? If so, well done. I'll take the extra viewer count. Cheers. No, their names did not all have to rhyme. Flavio Biondo. Anyway, the universe is 3724. Okay, so he was really interested in reading ancient texts. He could read Greek and he could read Latin, which was something that was becoming sort of a big deal around that time, right? You were educated if you could read the Greek and the Latin. The things that he liked to do is read these ancient texts, and then he'd like to go to the places that they referred to. And maybe this actually gets back around to what Moose was talking about. Back when we were talking about Africa in our last viewer request episode, Moose was like, what's the benefit of being there? Well, Flavio Biondo was one of these guys that wanted to go see it. So he finds a document that talks about this mountain. He wants to go look at the mountain. And he wanted to sort of think spatially about how things would have looked back then in relation to the way that things look now. And one of the things that he did that was really interesting was he wrote this sort of book that was what we call a topography, or a view of the way that things were laid out. Topographical map like this, but of the ancient world. And he looked at the city of Rome, and he found all of these descriptions about where buildings were and what they would have looked like. And he was one of the first people that came up with this idea of trying to draw a map of ancient Rome as it would have looked in the ancient world. And this is a kind of a fascinating concept, understanding the fact that the modern city of Rome for him was significantly different than the ancient city looked like, or the medieval city looked like. And this sort of topographical history of Rome got a lot of people thinking, well, what about other cities? What about other places? What did other things look like? So you start seeing these sort of germs of ideas that spread through the Renaissance And it's really interesting stuff that he came up with. Because we are talking specifically here about how certain techniques and certain concepts were developed, I do also want to describe Flavio Bondo because he was the guy that first used the terms ancient, medieval, and modern to describe history. Ancient stuff being before the medieval period, and then the modern period being where he was. And these are still the same words that we use. Our discussions of ancient world, and then medieval world, and then modern world, and now postmodern world. This is all based on his stuff. And this guy was writing back in the early 1400s. So, pretty interesting stuff. Making of a roll call. I don't keep roll. I don't give gold stars for perfect attendance. I just appreciate that anybody willing to show up does show up. So, as long as there's no sleeping. I don't know if I would even know if people were sleeping. I guess if you leave your chat running, I guess that's all that matters, right? The Asperger's type of information collectors laid out a lot of the foundations. I would suggest that is not so far from the truth. There are people who enjoy making order out of chaos. There are people who look at big piles of data and go, I would be comfortable putting this in order. And I do think that there are people that have non-neurotypical brains that get in history and do stuff like this. There are several people that I could think of that are great examples of this, like Francis Bacon, the guy that basically came up with the scientific method. He was one of these people that just sort of got switched on to stuff and then would go at it like, a rabid mongoose. There are a lot of people through history that sort of get that way. I would be here more if there was a perfect attendance reward. Also, different times make for different people too. Well, I don't know. To a certain extent, yes. Sociology speaking, different cultures have different mores, but I do want to point out that human beings are human beings, and culture can change, but our DNA has not changed as much as our culture has. And what we all want has not really changed any since we first became Homo sapiens. So we are still the DNA strands that we were more or less 220,000 years ago. Now, what we think is important is the same thing, just with different shades of set dressing, right? Okay, so again, I'm not going to get bogged down into every single piece, but we need to move on. So we'll get to the Enlightenment. One of the big things about the period of the Enlightenment is this idea of searching out the origin of things and being able to classify things in taxonomies and organizing the ideas in scientific ways and looking for the natural law. And we won't spend a whole time talking here about the Enlightenment. That's for another several streams. But what we're looking here again is we have this emphasis on Greek and Latin. And one of the things that comes up during this period of time is the city of Pompeii. Pompeii, of course, was destroyed by the mountain called Vesuvius back in the early part of the 1st century AD rather, and was still sitting there, and today is still sitting there, and we're still digging it up. But there were some efforts during the Enlightenment period to dig up Pompeii. Now, these were mostly being done by people that wanted stuff, right? They weren't really interested necessarily in studying the site. What they wanted was the stuff. They wanted the potential for statues or artwork or fancy pieces of stuff that they could put on displays, because that would sort of give off this right air, if you will. You're not sure you agree. Personality types find different forms of expressions, different environments. Oh, certainly so. What I'm saying, though, is that human beings, as a species, if we're just looking at the concept of Homo sapiens, we have not really changed that much. Now, we still have the prime, concept of preserving ourselves. We still have that sort of idea of protecting what we have, and we still need food and clothing and shelter. We have the basic needs and things of that nature. What I'm trying to say is that those sort of inherent base desires, the sort of hardwiring of our brains, has not changed very much. Now, of course, through time, as societies change, we're going to want different things, right? During certain periods of time, austerity is in vogue. So during the Puritan periods of time, people did not want a lot of stuff. Or perhaps if we looked at certain Buddhist communities during the height of Buddhic asceticism, people weren't interested in possessing a lot of stuff, but what we were still looking for was that same sense of completion and that same sense of belonging and being important and understanding the way that the universe operates. So while we have found different ways to meet those basic needs, we still have the same basic needs. That's what I'm trying to get at. Who said the men don't make the time makes the man, or something like that? I've heard that. I don't know who actually said it to begin with, but I think I'm not making myself very clear, and that's potentially because I'm half of a brain. Probably Lincoln. I don't know. Who knows? Anyway, so you see these people starting to try to dig up Pompeii, and they actually find a lot of stuff. And this sort of gets a lot of people excited. Like, hey, what if there are other cool things digging around out there? And one of the people that gets really interesting in Pompeii and Herculaneum, the city right beside Pompeii, is a guy named Joseph Bonaparte, who is the brother of Napoleon Bonaparte. And this guy gets really involved in buying up land and trying to secure artifacts and stuff. This is going to have some impact on his brother, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But what we see in the field of archaeology during this period of time is a push towards standardization, a push towards organization, and an introduction of some form of scientific rigor. People didn't want to just go randomly dig around stuff. They wanted to try to understand what they were seeing. And during this period of time, you have the emergence of the field of geology, which is going to have a lot of impact on archaeology because of a particular idea called stratigraphy. So stratigraphy is the concept that there are layers of time preserved in the soil and then layers of time preserved in the rock. And different layers have different times associated with them. This was a geological concept, but it's not very long before people begin to apply this to the earliest versions of archaeology. Not strategery. Pom-poms ruled out the market against Pompeii, just like Hey, Techman, welcome. So let me talk about one interesting little way that stratigraphy manages to get into archaeology. We're going to talk about this guy. And you go, well, I didn't think we were going to be talking about American presidents tonight. This guy's Thomas Jefferson. And you might ask, what the devil does this guy have to do with archaeology at all? Well, it turns out that as a young man, old TJ here was actually quite interested in some of the Native American stuff that he saw around him in the New World. And one of the things that he thought was really interesting were Native American mounds. These are burial mounds, by the way. No off-color humor here. So he's seeing all these burial mounds that are left behind, and he decides, I'm going to dig one of these up. Now, of course, he didn't really ask. He just kind of goes to digging. And he cuts a trench right down the middle of one. And he starts looking at it and he goes, hey, look, there are layers. And this is like the geology stuff. I wonder if these layers correlate to different periods of history. And if so, that means the people buried up at this layer at the top are younger than the people buried at this layer down below. We built the city on rock and roll. And the old city. Exactly. And the ancient burial mounds of the people that came before us. So he writes up this whole discourse about how this concept of stratigraphy can be used as a way to measure burial stuff. And people are like, yeah, that makes perfect sense. If it works for geology, it should work for this new concept of ancient stuff too. So you get old TJ adding to the mix. Interesting little twists of fate there. All right, so moving along. And again, I realize that I'm sort of going through this at a breakneck clip, but there's a lot of stuff that I wanted to talk about, and I had to cut it down, and I even had to cut it down again after I cut it down the first time. Let's talk about Johann Winkelmann. 2 N's, yes. Johann Winkelmann. And you're like, that's... dirt lasagna. Exactly. Johann Winkelmann is this guy. He is a German who was one of the sort of... We clearly need to do a part 2. Well, if we were going to do a part 2, I needed to have called this History of Archaeology Part 1. As it is, we're going to get through it. Of course he's a German. So, Johann Winkelmann, what's up with this guy? Well, he's going to be a pretty important dude because one of his things, if you note here, he's reading Greek. This book has Greek writing on it. He was super interested in Greek stuff. Barely even sounds German. Hey, Daria, welcome. Welcome. Good to see you. So, Johann Winkelmann is really interested in Greek stuff, especially Greek pottery. And he comes up with this concept that you could perhaps, if it was cataloged and done correctly, you could maybe use Greek pottery as a way to create a timeline of Greece, because he notes that there are different periods of time that pottery changes and art on the pots change, and he knows that these correspond with specific changes in Greek culture. So what he does is he starts classifying all of these different pieces of Greek pottery. And he begins to associate periods of time with artistic changes. And if you do anything with the ancient Greek world now, and you run into any sort of pottery, you're going to run into terms that this guy came up with. Like, oh, this is an archaic period piece. Or, oh, this is a Minoan piece, or not, he didn't say Minoan, but this is a red and black lacquer piece. So this guy is, oh yeah, the bot gets confused, so you have to like pause just a little bit between the shout outs. But thank you, Brittany, for giving shout outs. Everybody go follow Daria and everybody else who streams Cave. Yes, go stream Cave. Or go stream Cave. Go follow Cave. So, I bet it will work now. Boom, there we go. Go give all the follows. Anyway, yeah, stupid robot. So, this is a pretty big deal because other people start looking at other cultures and recognizing that you can see significant cultural changes when pottery changes. And we still use a lot of the techniques to date stuff that Winckelmann basically pioneered. This idea of looking at a pot and then knowing what period of time in Greece that it came from. That's a pretty big deal. Okay, so I mentioned Napoleon earlier, but the other Napoleon, Napoleon Bonaparte, not Joseph Napoleon, or not Joseph Bonaparte, rather. He was a big deal in the French world. We all know that Napoleon basically took over everything. But one of the cool things about his trips were his interest in this art stuff. He was sort of in this elite world of being rich and fancy and wanting to see cool things. And during the 1790s, he actually went down into Egypt and brought with him on purpose a whole slew of scholars and historians, because he knew that Egypt was full of old stuff. And in his expeditions down into Egypt, there's a lot of stuff that gets turned up, including one of the most famous pieces of archaeology ever, this thing. This is the Rosetta Stone. This was discovered during Napoleon's trip down into Egypt. And we talked about this a few weeks ago when we were talking about the Ptolemies. It actually records the coronation service of one of the pharaohs of the Ptolemaic dynasty that they were trying to prop up and make him look super Egyptian, which is why they wrote it in the old Egyptian hieroglyphics up here at the top. So this is hieroglyphics, and this is Demotic, and this is Greek. So this is going to help French scholars translate ancient Egyptian. And man, does this kick off a whole whirlwind of things, because now everybody understands that these people were really people, and they start being able to read all of these translated documents that come from ancient Egypt, and people start becoming absolutely fascinated with the ancient East, and you see this new movement of Orientalizing. This concept of exploring and loving the East. Now, this also comes during a period of rapid imperial expansion. This is at the very beginning of the Industrial Revolution, when you start seeing the countries of Europe, especially countries like Germany and France and England, taking over large parts of Asia using industrial power. But Orientalizing is very much part of that. This idea that the East held with it this previously unknown chunk of knowledge, this deep understanding of the universe and the way that everything operates that had been so foreign to Western mindsets for thousands of years, because they had effectively been out of touch with the Orient for that long. But these people get really, really excited about this. 3D printing, setting up studio. Hey, cultural appropriation. Yes, it is absolutely cultural appropriation. And in this particular stance, it is very physically cultural appropriation. So let's talk about some cultural appropriation. So in the 1800s, we move over to a period of time where archaeology effectively lost a lot of the ground it had made up in the Enlightenment. It had been moving towards this concept of legitimacy. It had been imbued with a lot of sort of early scientific rigor, the concept of organizing things and cataloging things and being very meticulous with your details, and understanding how things worked across, spectra of time. And especially after stuff like the Rosetta Stone, archaeology really just became a rich white man's plaything. It was something that rich people in Europe decided to do as a hobby. And this is going to set archaeology back a long way, because it is utterly disorganized. It is just rampant, and in very many cases, it is literally criminal. Because a lot of the people that get involved in this are doing it purely to either resell stuff on a growing antiquities market or to basically keep it for themselves. So let's talk about some of the darker, not so celebrated figures in archaeological history, like Giovanni Belzoni. Giovanni Belzoni was an Italian guy that literally started his life working in a circus as a strongman. And he got sort of bounced around and ended up down in Egypt, where he very quickly orientalized and realized that he could be very, very rich if only he could get his hands on some ancient stuff and drag it back to Europe, and either then keep it for himself or sell it to some other people. So Giovanni Belzoni becomes a tomb robber. He was the first Westerner to break into the second largest pyramid on the plateau of Giza, the Pyramid of Khafre. He was noted for getting into and looting several very big tombs of some pretty prominent pharaohs. No, wait, that's Lara Croft. No, it's this guy. And one of the more famous things that he looted is this guy. This is a gigantic statue of Ramses II. It's sort of, I guess, lovingly, that's not the right word. He called it the Young Memnon. This thing weighs like 17 tons. It's absolutely enormous. And you can go see it today if you want to. All you have to do is go to the British Museum, because that's where it is, because that's where he sold it to a guy, and then it ended up getting sold to the country, and there have been some legal stuff trying to get stuff back, and of course that doesn't always turn out in favor of the way that it should. But yeah, take it from Egypt and sell it to people in Europe. It makes you a lot of money. But what if you don't want to sell it? What if you just want to hold on to it? Well, then you end up being like Thomas Bruce. You probably don't know who Thomas Bruce is. Thomas Bruce is the Earl of Elgin. And he's a rather fancy-looking gentleman. Here we go. Thomas Bruce here, with his nice red coat. Proper fancy British gentleman. Well, turns out that he wanted to go over to the Ottoman Empire, and at that point, Greece was part of the Ottoman Empire. And so the Ottoman Empire controlled all of Greece. This is before the Greek War of Independence, which was concluded in 1830. So Greece was part of the Ottoman Empire, and Elgin basically managed to skirt the line between Ottoman control and sucking up to native Greek people, but he got himself up on top of the Parthenon in Athens and stole a whole bunch of the decorations off of the Parthenon. And these are called the Elgin marbles. This is what would have been on the east pediment of the Parthenon in Athens. And this is, by the way, not all of the stuff that was taken. There are about 30 different pieces. So if you know what the front of the Parthenon looks like, I don't know. If you click on the 6-month subscriber badge that I have, that's the Parthenon. And you can see that the front of it is sort of triangular, and this would have been a triangular arrangement where, it would have sat on the inside of that. So yeah, this is now in the British Museum. So if you want to go see what the front of the Parthenon would have looked like, or the sides of the Parthenon, you can go to England. The Elgin marbles are still very much in dispute. And this even came up during Brexit. One of the things that Greece really tried to get into the Brexit deal was a blanket statement that Britain had to recognize that it possessed cultural heirlooms of other European countries, and by recognizing that, also then recognized that those heirlooms should have been repatriated long times ago. So I don't know how that actually all worked out or not. He must have been freezing. But yes, the friezes are actually another part of the Elgin marbles, including some really striking friezes of a group of soldiers on horseback. Really beautiful stuff. Anyway, so you see this archaeological infancy movement where people are basically just going and finding stuff and then making themselves rich off of it, or showing it off to people. And then you have this guy, Augusta Mariette. And he looks like this. We're actually getting to the point now where, hey, look, we have photographs. Augusta Mariette. So, he was a Frenchman, and he spent some time down in Egypt. And he was one of the first people that really started understanding that the way that you needed to gain access to stuff was by working with local people. And he had made a lot of friends with some of the local tribes of semi-nomadic people inside of Egypt, and they led him to this very, very famous location in Egypt called Saqqara, where they are still today finding mummies. I don't know if they actually found one today, but if you've seen any of the news lately about, hey, we found another cache of 50 mummies, that stuff has all been at Saqqara. Well, Augusta Mariette was the guy that first started working on that from an archaeological perspective. But what's interesting about Mariette is that when he started working, he had made some deals with the local Bedouin people, or the local nomadic people, but he had not really made any deals with the government of Egypt. And they brought charges against him for destruction and destruction of antiquities and for looting. And he's like, whoa, 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 whoa. And he sort of backed up and worked through all of this stuff. And he was one of the first people that sort of began standardizing the practice of talking to a local government and getting their okay before you start doing stuff. Now, let's make this clear. Mariette was not a perfect archaeologist. He and his group still managed to transport a significant amount of stuff out of Egypt that was not necessarily done according to the deal, but even his acknowledgement that you should have an agreement and an arrangement with the local people is a movement in the right direction. 3D printing. I do not have a 3D printer, and I don't know if it would just be a fancy toy for me, or if I would do anything with it that was legitimate. I would probably just make like, oh, look, I made stick figures, woo! Or, oh, look, I made a little Star Wars thing, or, whatever. Oh, look, I made a Gundam. Back in the lab coat says, try yours first. I don't know. Like, I don't even think I would really, if you gave me a 3D printer right now, I don't know what I would 3D print. I really don't. Like, what would I make with a 3D printer? I would make something that I would think is really, really cool for about 2 weeks, and then it would turn into something that collected dust. It would be like a kid with something that he got for Christmas. So I don't know what I would need. Now, if I ever break a piece off of a Gundam, I might call you up and see if we can kit bash me a piece that I could, use to replace something on a model. But that's, You're making a toilet paper holder next. That's excellent. You're like, I don't even know what I would do. And Daria's like, I'm making something to hold my toilet paper. Oh, good times. Okay, so let's talk about moving towards legitimacy. Now, I said moving towards legitimacy, not we have arrived there yet. But let's talk about Augustus Pitt Rivers. This guy. The very model of a modern major general. So, who is this guy? Well, Pitt Rivers is initially more interested in anthropology and ethnology than he is archaeology, because archaeology at that point, again, was not necessarily an organized study at the time, but anthropology and ethnology were both becoming very, very big. This is the period of time in the middle 1800s where everybody is interested in where people came from, because this is the period of nationalism where everybody has to understand where their people came from and who their people were related to. And of course, this runs into both eugenics, and it also creates the hotbed that people like Hitler fall into, where you can classify human beings according to their history. But yeah. So what Pitt Rivers does that helps archaeology is this concept of understanding that the artifacts that are in a region show the development of a people group over time. And one of the things that he is going to bring into the mix is stuff that is very mundane, that had not really been that big of a deal. Even when we go all the way back to the fancy people that were doing stuff a long time ago, most of the stuff that they were looking at or that they wanted was fancy artwork, right? You know, they want statues, they want mosaics, they want frescoes that they can take back to their place and put up and look at fancy things. But Augustus Pitt Rivers goes, look, man, if we're going to study these people, if we're going to study this group of individuals that lived in the city, you've got to look at everything. You've got to look at their plates. You've got to look at their eating utensils. You've got to look at the combs that they use, the mundane tools, the very basic everyday pieces of detritus. Those are what make us who we are. And you have to catalog that stuff too. So this sort of broadening of the scope of archaeology away from more of the art collector view and on towards the let's actually look at a sort of 360 degree image of what these people look like was super important. And this is going to prove to be very influential in the field, because here's the thing about it. You might have 3 or 4 really fancy pieces of art from a site, right? You go to this ancient site, you dig it up, you might find 3 or 4 things that you might consider museum quality. However, you might find 400 things that are just everyday pieces of people's lives. This random pot that doesn't really have any artistic value. This plate, this piece of cast-off jewelry, this broken sword handle, these eating utensils. All of this stuff can tell us about people, and Pitt Rivers was the guy that made us stop and recognize that you had to look at that stuff too. You can't just go, garbage, and toss it over to the garbage bin, right? I love collecting and cataloging, but how can I contribute to this collective knowledge? Talk to your local museum, and the curator of your local museum will, I guarantee you, know people in what might be regional universities or what might be state or federal level people that are archaeologists that would be interested in either having you volunteer some time to help out or just be interested in maybe looking at the stuff that you have. I can tell you that a lot of times those people do a lot of very thankless work and would enjoy talking to somebody that would be really interested about it, because I talk to those people and they're always excited to talk to me. Well, if you have a whole bunch of stuff, I would go talk to a local museum or go talk to a local university that might have an antiquities department and see what you can do with that. Can you rent out or loan your private collection to a museum? You can absolutely loan private collections to museums. A lot of the stuff that's in the Smithsonian is not owned by the government. It's on loan. A lot of stuff that's in the Metropolitan Museum of Art is on loan. A lot of stuff in a lot of museums is on loan. So yeah, talk to people. You never know. There might be something that people want to look at or that they might be interested in putting up. So it doesn't hurt to ask. Okie doke. So we have started looking at the mundane stuff. What about Flinders Petrie? And you go, holy moly, that's an interesting name. Yeah, it is. This is Flinders Petrie. By the way, this is not the Petrie of Petri dish fame. This has nothing to do with that guy at all. Flinders Petrie is an archaeologist, and what he is going to be particularly, and I spelled his name wrong. What he's particularly known for is a process called seriation. And you go, what the devil is that? I'm glad you asked. Let me tell you. Okay, so hypothetically speaking, let's say we have a jar. And on this jar, it says, made by Shane. And it has my handwriting on it. Okay. And one day in the distant future, when the alien archaeologists are coming through the radioactive wasteland of Earth after we've blown it all up with nuclear bombs, they find this jar and they go, oh, check it out. This jar is made by Shane. And because I'm intelligent and I know that the world is about to end, I have carved all of my history into stone so that it will be preserved, and all of the digital stuff that's going to get EMP'd is going to be gone forever. They will know when I lived and all about me. Okay, well, let's say I'm also a rather prolific pottery maker, and they go to another city, maybe 50 miles away where my friend lives, and they find another one of my pieces. And they go, I wonder when this person lived. And they go, oh, look, it's a Shane jar. And they go, oh, this person must have lived either at the time of Shane or after Shane. And they know that because they have used these pieces of artwork in serial, and they have been able to date this second site by the material that they have found at a first site. And that is called seriation. And this is something that is absolutely crucial to our understanding of the ancient world, because here's the thing. We don't have a lot of sources. We don't have a lot of points of data. We don't have a lot of hard and conclusive dates. So when we find a date and we are able to directly date a particular strata of a site, this gives us innumerable points of data, not just on the site that we're digging at, but any other site that has comparable artifacts. So when we go dig up a city that we don't know anything about, we don't have place names. Let's say we're just digging up this small little village. We don't know when the people lived there, what sort of people lived there, what type of people moved in or around the area, what they did for a living. We don't know any of this. But we start finding, let's say we start finding beveled rim bowls. And if you know anything about archaeology, the beveled rim bowl is sort of a type piece of art. Well, it's not really an artwork. I mean, I guess it's kind of an artwork. Anyway, these are very old Sumerian bowls. And we go, oh, well, the people here were old Sumerians. How do we know that? Because they're using pieces of culture that are directly relatable to pieces of culture that we can date, right? Shane jar does not sound right. We can't pinpoint why. Well, I would say Shane pot, but that might give people the wrong idea. So this concept of seriation is something that really works for Flinders Petrie. And this gets back to our earlier discussion about how certain people are just really interested in details. This guy is remembered in archaeology as one of the most meticulous documenters of archaeological pieces ever. We're talking like would measure potsherds and predict the circumference of pieces of bowls, and would be able to tell you like, oh, this was 4 millimeters thick and 6 millimeters tall and yada yada yada. And every little piece of data that he could get out of an artifact, he would write down and document. And this goes another long way towards this concept of legitimacy. When we start looking at things in a less biased way, and we start looking at things in a much more detail-oriented way, this is going to start bringing people sort of around to the idea. But let's be very clear, this period of time is dominated by people that are not Augustus Pitt Rivers or Flinders Petrie. It's dominated by people that do big stuff, and they do it usually really badly. People like Heinrich Schliemann. This might be one of the few people that you have heard of in this discussion. Heinrich Schliemann. Here we are. Mr. Schliemann. He is a German, and he was mostly interested in linguistics, and that's going to sort of be his entryway into the field of archaeology, because he was especially interested in Greek and Roman ancient documents. And in particular, this guy was absolutely fascinated by the writings of Homer, that old famous Greek guy that wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey. And Schliemann was absolutely convinced that the Iliad and the Odyssey were based on historical events. He just knew it. Now, they had clearly been elaborated, and the stuff with all of the gods and the invincible warriors and, the earthquakes and the Trojan horse stuff had almost certainly been added on top of what was clearly a real story. But the kernel of the story was accurate. There really were these people at places like Mycenae and places like Orchomenos and places like Attica and Troy. But at that time, historically speaking, nobody knew where any of that stuff was. So Schliemann, being a rich guy with a lot of contacts, decides, I'm going to go find it. I'm going to go find all of these places, and I'm going to prove that these people really existed, and I'm going to make it happen. So he gets over to Turkey, and he starts just sort of digging around wherever he can. He thinks that it's in one place, and he digs that up, and he doesn't really find it. But he starts digging at another location, and it turns out, hey, there's some stuff here, and it looks like it might correlate chronologically, and there's a lot of gold stuff, and this seems to indicate that there's a big city here in Turkey that would be roughly where Troy was if we're looking at the Iliad and the Odyssey as historical documents. And it does look like it was destroyed around the period of time that it was potentially a real group of people back in the end of the Bronze Age. And it turns out this guy actually did discover Troy. Now, here's the thing about it. When he was excavating, he's not following any rules. He's just digging stuff. And if you go to the modern site of Troy, it's effectively destroyed. A lot of the records that he kept were garbage. He really wasn't doing anything systematically. He was just sort of digging wherever he felt like it. He wasn't doing anything in a very organized way. So it's pretty bad. He also steals a whole bunch of stuff from Turkey and sneaks it out and smuggles it out of Turkey into Greece. The Turks bring international lawsuits against him, and he ends up having to pay a whole bunch of money to the Turkish government. And he says that he's going to give all of the stuff back, but he doesn't actually give it back. He gives some of it back. But as he can't really go over to Turkey very much anymore, he decides, well, I'm going to also go find all this stuff in Greece. So now, being sort of moderately famous, he gets the Greeks to sort of give him the thumbs up. So he starts going around and digging up other stuff, and he ends up finding Mycenae, the ancient city of Mycenae. which is in much better preservation. He didn't do a lot of the excavation himself, thank goodness. You can still go see it in Mycenae today. It's actually quite cool. And by the way, I was going to start showing you a lot of these places and a lot of these photos of places that I've been to that have been discovered and excavated, but then I realized this is probably already going to be a long discussion, and adding more pictures is just going to stretch it out. Plus, we're going to do a whole stream of me just showing pictures probably next week on Tuesday. So I can just say, come back next week and we'll show pictures. So we'll focus on just showing pictures of the people today. So he discovers the Mycenaeans and does a lot of work in proving that the Iliad and the Odyssey were constructed on actual stories. But he did really bad archaeology. It was not systematic or organized at all. And he's also a thief. So, again, we're moving towards legitimacy, but we ain't there yet. Earth. What about Arthur Evans? Arthur Evans, this guy looks probably more like an archaeologist than anybody else in the group today. This is Mr. Arthur Evans, well, technically Sir Arthur Evans, British explorer / archaeologist. This guy was really interested in this concept of Greece being older than we thought. And he sort of springboards off of some of the stuff that Schliemann was doing. Like, okay, well, if there are myths based in reality, what about other myths? Like, what about that whole ancient Greek myth of these big cities on the island of Crete where people have so much gold and there are these giant man-eating minotaurs and these huge palaces that are covering up labyrinths and all this stuff? What if that's real too? So he goes down to the island of Crete, and he's going to start excavating at a big city. Crete is right here, by the way. Big ancient site. And he excavates Knossos, which was the ancient capital of the Minoan people. And he proves the existence of this entire group of people, the Minoans. And this is a huge, huge deal because, again, we are to the point now where archaeology is adding to our larger understanding of history, because the concept of myth is not necessarily just myth anymore. Now it's becoming potentially real, and people are starting to pay attention a lot more to the idea that archaeology could be not just a rich person's game or an art collector's game, but a historian's game. And this idea of maybe they're actually valuable as a field. However, this is not done perfectly. For example, when Knossos is discovered and he starts excavating Knossos, there is a particular room that he called the throne room. And inside of it, there were these really big murals. Lots of figures of people and bulls, and the walls were painted, and the murals had been sort of damaged both through time and over the course of excavation, because his excavation wasn't necessarily very precise. So he hires a bunch of Swiss artists to come down and repaint the murals. Yeah, just, touch them up and make them look nice. And try to make them look like they would have been at the time. But, in some of these big empty gaps, you can kind of just just kind of do whatever you need to. So he had them paint over the ancient stuff, which it kind of makes me sad, except for the fact that I've been to Knossos, and let me tell you, the modern day Knossos it made me even sadder. Like, I knew that this thing happened. I wasn't really going to be interested in going into the palace or the throne room at Knossos anyway, because, well, first off, I knew that there would be a line, and second off, I knew that what I was looking at wasn't really the way that it was supposed to look. But when I got to Knossos, Mac Mac in a lab coat and I went to Knossos. It has turned into effectively a Greek Disney World. It is massively overpriced to get into. They have built reconstructions of buildings on top of the ruins. In many places, you can't even actually see Knossos anymore. What you can see is a modern reproduction of what they think Knossos looked like, built on top of the ancient stuff. And that really hurt my feelings. Of all of the places that I went to in Greece, that one sort of hurt my heart. Disney World is at least fun. Knossos is a carnival theme park, but sadder. Can confirm. Can confirm. I feel like you're building up to Atlantis. I have a theory about Atlantis. And this is not necessarily the right... Oh, Mac. I love that Mac already knows this. Oh, man. Oh, man. I have Atlantis stuff. Yeah. That is for another time. Oh, my goodness. Okay, so there's Arthur Evans. Viewer request. Oh, maybe so. We're sort of backed up with viewer requests now, and it would be interesting to see if that little nugget maintains interest long enough for us to get back to doing viewer requests. We have 2 in the lineup right now, by the way. Our next one is just a photo show where we spend the whole day or the whole stream just looking at pictures of places that I've been and me talking about it. The second one is famous people from Florence, which I'm super looking forward to, which is going to be not next week, but the week after, most likely. And Fitz like writing notes like Atlantis conspiracy theories from Shane. Oh, wow. I'm dropping frames like crazy right now. Is everybody okay on the other end? Everybody still with me? Okay, so it's bounced back up. I hope I didn't drop the stream there. Okay, we're okay? All right. Okay, so let's talk about this guy, Howard Carter. This might be the only other guy that you have maybe heard of on this stream. This guy, Howard Carter. Dun, 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 dun. So who is this dude? Well, this guy is most famous for digging up Tutankhamun. So, Howard Carter was being funded by a very rich guy named Lord Carnarvon and had done some exploration around the Valley of the Kings in Egypt and was led by a group of local people to this particular location where they expected a treasure to be found. And it turns out, yes, in fact, there was a treasure there. There was the mostly intact tomb of an Egyptian pharaoh, a guy named Tutankhamun, who was a pharaoh of the 18th dynasty, who is probably the most famous archaeological find in history. Definitely one that has sort of captured the zeitgeist of a lot of people. Just to let everybody know, Tutankhamun was not such a big deal as a pharaoh. The value, and this is going to sound really rude to his to his life, but Tutankhamun is probably more famous now than he was when he was alive. And potentially more important to the field of archaeology than he was to Egypt as a historical leader. He was a young kid that ruled during a very tumultuous period of time. He never really had solo rule. He was probably killed by people within his own court. He had regents almost his entire period of time. You shall invoke the curse. Oh yeah, the curse of the mummy. But Tutankhamun was right up there, and Howard Carter was the guy that made it happen. And it should also be noted that in the process of trying to take all of the stuff off of Tutankhamun, they did a whole bunch of stuff like rip off his body parts because they weren't really being careful and they wanted the cool gold stuff. So like his head's detached, and there was a particular part of his male anatomy that was lost for a little while. The cataloging took a long time, but they didn't really play very nice with his actual body. So not always the best here in the ancient world as a note. Okay, so Howard Carter. There we go. And by the way, these last few are what I sort of titled the golden age of archaeology, back when things were becoming super big highlights. You know, this stuff like the discovery of Troy and Tutankhamun and Knossos, these are humongous finds that gain international attention, and people are going to start really paying attention to this stuff. And this is what is going to allow archaeology to turn into a discipline. The interest that it's gaining is going to also bring the attention of other disciplined fields, things like geology, sociology, anthropology, history. People are going to start looking at this and going, if you're going to do this, you have to do it the right way. And there were people within archaeology that were always trying to do that anyway, but this whole idea of it being a rich white guy's pastime or hobby was going to have to back off. And some of the people that really made a lot of headway in this were Mortimer and Tessa Wheeler. Mortimer and Tessa Wheeler. And I want you all to know that in all of the pictures that I had to find today, the most difficult picture I had to dig for was a picture of Mortimer and Tessa together. And I'll explain why in just a second. So here are Mortimer and Tessa Wheeler, and if you'll note, the caption down here says Dr. and Mrs. Mortimer Wheeler. Doesn't even say Tessa's name. And there's a reason for that. Because at the time, and you'll note that this was taken in 1930, because at the time, Tessa still couldn't even get a college degree in a lot of the places in the world. And a lot of the contemporary pictures that you see are just Mortimer and all of their Britishy Britishness, indeed. So the contemporary pictures have mostly pictures of Mortimer. Now, here's the thing about it. Now, in modern times where we are less, misogynistic, I would hope, or, well, I guess less misogynistic is the right way to go, because even 5% less is still less, right? Now we recognize the value of Tessa Wheeler as part of the husband-wife duo. So a lot of the pictures that have been published recently are just of Tessa, and sort of a, look, she was a pioneer of archaeology, and she did stuff by herself, and she deserves all the credit. But what's weird is it's hard to find a picture of them both. So that's why it took me about 25 or 30 minutes to find a picture of them together, because I wanted to show them together, because they did their excavation together and they developed a lot of stuff together. So first off, they are both archaeologists. They were both part of the British archaeology groups that were really sort of big. But one of the things that they were specifically interested in doing was talking about the value and the validity of archaeology as a field. They both spoke in public quite a bit. They did a lot of sort of archaeological apologizing, trying to get the word out, get people interested, trying to get standards brought into the field, trying to get people to understand the value of archaeology. And their concepts of bringing archaeology to the public were really important because, until it became something that had value to everyday people, it was still going to just be that rich old white guy that was doing it. It was always going to be the pastime of the elite. And a lot of people still looked at it that way. They didn't see the value in it because it was just some fancy dude that wanted to decorate his house, right? But these people are going to do a lot towards bringing that wall down. And they're also really big pioneers in the actual field of excavation. They are going to work on and develop something called the Wheeler system, or the Wheeler method. The Wheeler method of excavation is going to become the standard operating procedure basically from that point forward. If you've ever seen a squared grid of archaeological excavation, these are the people that came up with the idea. So where you dig a square and you leave a little wall to hold the squares up, that's called the balk, B-A-L-K. And you categorize every single strata. You dig all of the squares one strata at a time. You catalog everything very detailed. And then if you do go to the next one, you make certain that you have photographs and very detailed notes of every single layer. Because here's the thing about archaeology. One of the things is that to get to the really, really old stuff, sometimes you have to dig through the newer stuff. So if you want to look at the Neolithic remains of a city, you might have to dig through the Archaic remains, or you might have to dig through the Iron Age remains. So as you're doing that, you're very potentially destroying data. This is the stuff that Schliemann was doing, like just kind of going at stuff with a shovel and not really paying a lot of attention to what you were doing. But this Wheeler method, which becomes the Wheeler-Kenyon method, and we'll talk about Kathleen Kenyon in just a second. But this idea of being very slow and methodical and starting off with the top layer and then moving down layer by layer through the strata in these very ordered squares, this is archaeology today. This is where these people really start of, they kick a lot of this stuff off. Since I have mentioned women in archaeology, let's talk about some women in archaeology, because it is starting to open up during this period of time of the 1930s and 40s, especially after World War II. You start seeing people recognize that, hey, look, women can get involved in things and women know stuff. And of course, we all know that today, and I'm not trying to be like, oh, women know things. My wife is smarter than I am. But archaeology had not really caught up to that yet. So people like Eileen Fox, and we'll talk about Kathleen Kenyon again in just a second. Eileen Fox, who lived from 1907 to 2005. Here's an image of Lady Fox. And she's actually a lady, a title. I wasn't trying to call her hey, look at this lady. She was... if not the first official professor of archaeology that was a woman in England, she was one of the first one or two. She was the pioneer of the archaeology department at the University of Exeter. And if you know anything about archaeology, the University of Exeter is one of the finest archaeological schools on earth. When I was looking at places to do my master's degree, and I was considering doing master's and doctoral degrees in archaeology, I was talking to people at Exeter because they are at the top, and she was the lady that started their program. Now, it should be noted that she was the one that got the funding and the support for the program and got it off the ground, and then they gave the directorship of that program to a man, because you can't have a woman being at the head of a department. We all know what this was going to happen. But we know that she was responsible for this. She did a lot of archaeology work around England. England has an incredibly diverse archaeological history. They have stuff all the way back from the prehistoric Stone Age all the way through the modern day. At every level of stuff in the British dirt, you can find something interesting. And she had done a lot of work especially around some of the Roman forts in the area that were really, really well done. I'd love to go see some of the stuff that she worked on. I'd love to go to England and just see anything, just to be honest with you. Eileen Fox. And finally, Miss Kathleen Kenyon, who is probably one of the most famous archaeologists of the 20th century. Here she is, Kathleen Kenyon. Kathleen Kenyon was one of the head excavators at a site in what is today, it's over in the Jordan West Bank area, depending on who you believe controls the West Bank. It's part of Israel officially, but anyway. Kathleen Kenyon worked at a place called Jericho. And Jericho was a hugely important city in the ancient world, and people had known that it had a very, very long period of inhabitation. And she was one of the first people that actually got out to the site and started digging to see exactly how far back Jericho went. And she was using the Wheeler method that was, put together by Mortimer and Tessa Wheeler. And she actually made a couple of different modifications to the particular way that things were done, tools that were being used, ways things were being documented, which is today why it's referred to as the Wheeler-Kenyon method. So if you Google Wheeler-Kenyon method, you'll pop up I think there's a whole Wikipedia article about how to do it. But this is a really big deal. She was also instrumental in doing a lot of very ancient archaeology, either very late Neolithic period or early Bronze Age excavation in Jerusalem. She did have some problems with the local authorities, especially with the fact that she was a lady doing a lot of the sort of command work on the archaeological dig and doing a lot of the excavation stuff herself and doing a lot of the cataloging that sort of ran afoul of a lot of the more conservative individuals in the area. So she did get some pushback, but she is one of the more famous archaeologists of the 20th century, and she passed away in 1978. So 1906 to 1978. Really, really neat lady, though. And wrote some cool books, too, if you're interested in reading some of her stuff. I will note that the field of archaeology today is very much no longer a man's game. About half of the active archaeologists on Earth right now that have degrees that are doing actual digs are ladies. And I think that's great. I was actually... she belongs in a museum. Hey, David. I think some of her stuff is in a museum. I think her private collection was donated to a museum. I can't remember exactly where it is. Man, I should probably know that. But it's hard to keep up with where all of the people that I like's libraries go. We mean as a mummy? Oh, no. So how do whips, hats, and Nazi punching factor into archaeology? So if we were to put Indiana Jones on the archaeological spectrum, he would be roughly equivalent to people like Mortimer and Tessa Wheeler, people like Kathleen Kenyon, people like Eileen Fox, who were active in a lot of these areas during the period of the World War II whole saga. Between World War I and World War II, and then World War II as well. So I would love to have seen Eileen Fox punching a Nazi. I think that would have been great. I think she deserves an animatronic that gives the audio guided tour. Indiana Jones destroys a lot of artifacts. Yeah. It's fair to note that Indiana Jones does not do good archaeology. A lot of the stuff that he touches ends up breaking, and he has bad relationships with the native people. So maybe not the best role model to look forward to in the pure archaeological sense. Which brings me ironically, or maybe not ironically, or rather indirectly, to the biggest gripe that I had about the Suicide Squad movie. And you probably never thought that we would end up talking about the Suicide Squad movie here in a stream about archaeology, but strap in, here we go. So the whole premise of it belongs in one piece in a museum. Not all the native people who got their stones back were... That's true. They were happy, but he did have to kill a lot of them to make that happen. And those natives at the beginning of Raiders of the Lost Ark were pretty upset with him for stealing their statue. Young Indiana Jones is actually much better about doing archaeology the right way than adult Indiana Jones is. Anyway, so at the beginning of Suicide Squad, we have June Moon, who is ostensibly this high world-class archaeologist and a lady, so we're actually keeping up with modern times. But here's the thing. She finds this artifact, and the first thing that she does is break it on purpose. And that happens within like the first 3 minutes of the movie, and I was so mad. I was just hacked off from the first 3 or 4 minutes of that movie. And I'm like, okay, so yeah, this whole thing happened because an archaeologist purposefully broke something? No, this whole thing is garbage. The whole premise is garbage. I'm not accepting it. La 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 la. Cultists who kidnapped kids and ripped out hearts were killed, but not the natives who were robbed. Some cultists were harmed in the making of this archaeological documentary. So yeah, Suicide Squad, wrong right off the bat. Like, hey, I found this ancient artifact. I broke it in parts. Look at there. Just irks me. That's not the worst part. Well, I don't know. That might be the worst part. Suicide Squad was a bit of a mess of a movie. I'm kind of interested in seeing what James Gunn does with it. We shall see. Anyway, so what's going on with archaeology today? Because we have talked about some of this stuff already on stream, I don't want to necessarily dwell on it too much. I will refer you to what is actually the second stream ever of Adventures in History. It's called How We Know What We Know Part 2, where I talk all about modern archaeological techniques that involve science. Things like aerial and satellite technology, where we can see stuff from space, which helps us figure out where to dig. Carbon and radiometric dating, which of course helps us figure out how old things are. And one of the most important tools that science has added to archaeology lately has been DNA testing, which has absolutely revolutionized the field of archaeology. I feel like people understand that stuff a lot easier than perhaps where seriation comes from. Nobody knows who Flanders Petrie is except maybe me and a bunch of archaeology nerds. People don't necessarily know where the digging in squares comes from, or to call it the Wheeler-Kenyon model or method. So that's the stuff that I wanted to kind of focus on for tonight. And I have run my mouth a little bit longer than normal, but I really enjoyed this stuff. And I could have definitely run my mouth about this a lot more. But if we have any other questions about this stuff, any questions about archaeological techniques, or who came up with what, or where this stuff came from, or basically anything like that, please do ask now if you have not asked already. Because I would be super interested in continuing to chat about this. Also, if you look below your chat window, you will know that you will find perhaps that you have adventure points that you can spend to do various fun little things here in the chat. So if you have adventure points that you would like to spend, now is the time. I will also remind everybody that we are currently running a follower goal. We are almost halfway there. We are at 449 of 500. When we hit 500 followers, we will be doing another History of Middle-earth stream. I am a gigantic Tolkien fan, and it's been a fun series so far. You can see the first 3 episodes saved in the VODs if you're interested in learning a little bit about the way that Middle-earth was made and all of Tolkien's ideas about the history of his world. It's not technically history, but it's a fun little caveat, and I think it's something that we can all sort of get behind. All right, so I've been talking here a little bit, and I think everybody might be sleepy. So you might be sleeping in class now. I don't know. Aside from the pyramids, which of the 7 wonders of the ancient world have you seen in some form? Well, the pyramids are really the only ones that were left. The puppy. I think I might have to casually and politely ask my dearest wife to get the puppy, because I believe the puppy is outside. Okay, so what's up with the 7 wonders of the ancient world? So here's the thing. Of the 7 wonders that exist, the only ones that are still there are the pyramids. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon are destroyed. The Colossus of Rhodes got melted down and turned into money to fund a war. The Lighthouse of Alexandria fell into the ocean, and the city of Alexandria is partially underwater now. The statue of Zeus at Olympia is destroyed and gone. The mausoleum at Halicarnassus is all destroyed and gone, and I'm missing one. Pyramids, Hanging Gardens, Lighthouse, Colossus. Oh, the Temple of Artemis at Ephesus. So there's a kind of part of the Temple of Artemis at Ephesus that's still there, but it's not really the antique one. It's one that has been rebuilt. And you can still go see Ephesus today. I have been to Turkey, but I have not been to Ephesus. Okay, so let's get the puppy. Let me see if I can call the puppy. Oh, here comes the puppy. Hello. Hello, come and see me. Come on. Oh, there's the puppy. Hello. Hello. What you doing? Can I have this? Can I put this right here so that the people can see you? Oh, I know. I have broken protocol and I have taken the toy. I'm not supposed to take the toy. Where are you going? Where are you going? Come here. Come here. Come and see me. Oh, do you want your toy back? Are you being mad at me because I took your toy? Okay. Okay. Oh my goodness. Oh, the puppy. Oh yes. Oh, the puppy of war emotes. Oh, the puppy. She's a mess. Okay, I missed something else. Redeem random history fact. Dealer's choice. Dealer's choice. I will give you one little nugget of the Atlantis story. And before anybody else gets the idea, I will not give any more nuggets of the Atlantis story if you continue to redeem random history facts. So this is purely a one-time little nugget. Okay. In a particular document that Plato wrote, so this is Plato, the ancient Greek guy, Plato states that Atlantis sank below the waves 9,000 years before the time of Solon. And Solon was an ancient Greek politician. And that particular date coincides very nicely with a particular geologic event. And that's all you get. So, there you go. There's a little tidbit. Tell a Flint story. I could retell one of your Flint stories if you really wanted me to. The Atlantis story requires a ton of establishment up front, so it doesn't sound crackpot at the first glance. He's good at it. Okay, so don't tell a Flint story that you've already told. Okay, see, now I'm lost, because that would require me to sift through all of my data of what you have told me when we talk in person and what you have shared on the air, and that would take some time to corroborate, and I don't know if I could do that just off the top of my head. The first Macy's Holiday Parade? Yes, that's exactly the geological event that I was referring to. I appreciate the fact that Mac is supporting my theories of Atlantis without it seeming crackpot. The goal of my Atlantis theory is to not seem like I'm a crackpot. So, if I have achieved making myself sound legitimate to Mac, who is a pedant and a stoic, I feel like I've done something valid. Okay. Anybody have anything else? I'm shocked Shane gives any validity to Atlanta. The lost city of Atlanta, it's discovered by Fry. It's got KFC and mer people, right? I've seen that episode. Here in Atlanta, which is really crazy because Atlanta is really far from the coastline. The vast majority of Georgia would have to be underwater for Atlanta to fall underwater. So, okie doke. Anybody else? Anybody have questions or have comments or have any last minute requests of things or anything of that nature? Anybody? If not, I shall begin looking for a raid. And I believe I have already located our raid for the night. All right, so when's your next Gundam stream? Maybe Saturday? I don't know. It depends on what, or maybe Sunday. I don't know. I've got some plans for Saturday, but I don't know how long they're going to take. If I do something on Saturday, it will likely be, well, no, I probably can't do anything on Saturday because I have D&D on Saturday night. So maybe Sunday. Maybe Sunday during the middle of the day. Maybe. Or at least that's the plan. We'll see what actually happens. I do have a little bit of a light week when it comes to sociology stuff, but I should probably use that as an advantage to get ahead in other things so that I don't have any more crazy weeks like I had 2 weekends ago, which basically wasn't a weekend. I just worked all day through both days. So, life. All right, we're going to go raid Studio Doggaby. Studio Doggaby is a cool guy, hangs around the channel sometimes. He's a really cool artist. I thank all of you for hanging around tonight. I hope you all enjoy the viewer request episode. I really do like doing the viewer requests because I like talking about stuff that you all are definitely interested in. And I know that you're interested in it because you voted on it. I don't know if I saw Tuna Neal around tonight, but Tuna was actually the one that came up with the idea. So Tuna, if you're watching this on VOD, man, I hope it was everything that you dreamed it could be. Otherwise, we're going to go raid Studio. Our battle cry, as always, is adventure. And then if you have those beautiful adventure hats, you throw those all in the chat, as many of them as you feel comfortable with. So I will see everybody next time. We will be back on Thursday night talking about Korean history which I'm super excited about. Otherwise, I hope you all have a great next couple of days, and I will see you then. Take it easy.